Let me start today with something you might not expect. Most people don't lose the money game because they are not intelligent. They lose because they're playing inside of a story that tells them the game is rigged, the ladder is gone, the middle class is dying, and if they're not winning, it's because of somebody else, as if there's some kind of limit to success out there. And if you buy into that story and if you feed that story, then it doesn't just shape what you believe. It shapes what you do. It shapes what you don't do. It shapes the risks that you take, the skills that you build, the way you vote, the way you parent, the way you talk about successful people, and the way you interpret your own setbacks. And it definitely will feed into whether or not you're happy in life or miserable. So today we're going to talk about something that sits right in the middle of all of this, and that's the rise of the welfare state. In the last episode, we talked about the vanishing middle class narrative, let's call it, and how it's often used politically by both sides. So we're not pointing finger at the left or the right here. It's both sides doing it. But how that creates this impression that you or your children are automatically disadvantaged compared to the top 1%. You can't get there. Club's already closed. I argued something very simple. You are not locked out. You are not doomed. You have opportunity. But you might be playing by the wrong rules. You may not understand the rules. You might be playing by rules that are no longer effective. Basically, they're not there anymore. In future episodes, we will get more practical. We'll talk about things that you can actually do to put yourself in a position to be financially successful. More of like the strategy, technical stuff, strategies, behaviors, frameworks, decisions, that kind of stuff. But before we get there, we have to address more of a modern issue, because if you're going to change your life, you need perspective and awareness. And here's why. When you start climbing and you start winning, before you get very far, you, personally, you, the listener, person listening to me right now, you are going to become a target. Your success becomes a symbol to somebody else. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. And if you are not careful, your own success will be used against you. You will be turned into the villain. So today's episode is about preparing how incentives shape behavior and how narratives shape the incentives. We're not trying to point the finger at anybody, make fun of anybody. There are certainly people going through hardship. I am concerned with you as my listener. You as the person filing disputes. How do we protect your ability to build a better life? How do we help you teach your kids how to do the same? That's what I'm concerned about. A little bit on this topic, because I find it fascinating. I'll tell you why. A while back, I had a conversation with somebody who was working a pretty, what I consider, low-paying job, and didn't have a lot of money, and they didn't own a car, and they were living within walking distance of work. And in my opinion, that forced them to overpay for a substandard living condition. And so I asked them one day, I said, hey, why don't you just take the bus? There's public transportation all over here that would widen the radius of job opportunities that you have and maybe get you better living conditions, and you can start to climb up. And their answer was, because I'm comfortable. And I want to be careful here, because I'm not telling the story to judge somebody. I don't want you to judge them, because comfort is a survival strategy. Fear is real. Change is hard. Risk is real. The fear of change is real. But that conversation taught me something I keep coming back to. Just because you could have more doesn't mean you're willing to do what it takes to get more. And let's say that in as positive a moral way as we possibly can. So it's not an insult. It's just reality. Most people want more for their children. But instead of focusing on the choices that create their own personal situations, you see it all the time. It's easy. It's emotionally easier to point the finger and to blame other people. If you don't have it, it's because of somebody else. You didn't get the job, it's because of somebody else. You got fired, it's because of somebody else. You didn't win, it's because of somebody else. You didn't get playing time, it's because of somebody else. Here's the irony. There's a huge amount of tolerance in our culture for narratives that tear down the very incentives that create opportunity in the first place. the incentives out there that allow you and your kids and your grandkids to build something. And I'm not saying that the world is perfectly fair or that there aren't forces kind of against you, because depending on where you are, there could be. I'm not saying you're not swimming upstream. I felt like I've been swimming upstream my entire career. What I'm saying is that there is opportunity. Do you want fairness of opportunity? Or do you want the same result for everybody? You want an opportunity is what you want. You want a chance to get ahead. You want a chance to grow. You want a chance to build. Sometimes that opportunity is small. Sometimes it feels like it's shrinking. Maybe it is shrinking, but it's real and it's there and it can be taken advantage of. It's kind of where the risk comes in. If you don't take the risk, you can't take the opportunity. And here's where people split. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's just a pattern. There's three ways to go. Some people play to win. Some people play not to lose. One of the hardest lessons I ever learned in my life. Some people step off the field entirely. They just quit. If you want financial freedom, you need to be the kind of person who keeps playing and plays to win, even when it's uncomfortable, even when they're pointing the finger at you, even when you don't know why. Over the last 75 years or so, our society, I feel, has shifted. We used to celebrate people who came from nothing, who built something, and were fiercely independent. I grew up with my dad telling me about so-and-so did such and such, and we idolized people who were successful and who made money and who built businesses. Now we vilify most of those people. The loudest slice of public sentiment now seems to be we degrade the builders. We chastise independence. It's not about you. It's about us. You only got that because we helped you. Or you stole, You had some kind of advantage. And we argue that if you achieve, you owe everybody else. Regardless of if anybody else made a contribution to your success, if anybody else risked anything. This is what I'm calling the welfare state ethos. And in its extreme form, it's not really about helping people rise. Never was about helping people rise. It's about using the existence of struggle, and some of it's real struggle, I will give you that, to justify pulling down the people who are climbing. If you are climbing, you make the person not climbing uncomfortable. That's where we are as a society. If you have, they feel like they have not. And if you have, you should just give a little bit more so that the person who has not has an opportunity to enjoy the life that you've built. But you're the one who built it. So the question is, where does this come from and what do we do about it? And I first learned about the thing called the welfare cliff in an event that was hosted by a local foundation. And I remember thinking at the time I heard about it, I was like, oh, this makes sense. And here's the concept. The welfare cliff is a situation where someone earns just a little bit more money. Let's say somebody gets a raise and they make $10,000 more, but they lose $20,000 in public benefits. So you make a little bit more money, you lose a lot more in public benefits. So instead of earning more and keeping more, okay, now I can afford a car or something, they earn more on a paycheck, but then they lose a whole bunch of their welfare benefits, and that actually causes them a financial hardship. That's a real thing. And it creates this horrible feedback loop. Damned if I do, damned if I don't. And you'll actually hear that. In that socioeconomic group, you'll hear that. I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. I'm stuck. That's called an unintended consequence. Most welfare programs were created to help people, but many of them end up feeding a person without building a pathway that teaches them how to fish. So let me put also a disclaimer on this because I don't want people to think I'm callous in this area. Obviously, we want to help people who truly need help. Some people cannot help themselves, and it's clear there's some kind of issue and they cannot help themselves. A civilized society should not abandon people who cannot help themselves. However, here's the hard question. Should we be structuring systems in a way that also supports people who don't or will not help themselves, who are just comfortable? And before you tell me nobody likes being on welfare, I've been working in the finance industry for decades, working with people who have money to people who have no money, to people who have less than no money. And I will tell you, there are plenty of people being perfectly comfortable on welfare. of all socioeconomic levels. I've known millionaires on welfare who were perfectly fine with it. I've known more poor people on welfare who were perfectly fine with it, and everything in between. So it's not an honest statement to say that nobody wants to be on welfare. Maybe somebody's embarrassed to be on welfare, but do they have enough pride to get themselves off of welfare? Research and experience, my research, both show, and you can Google this, and I think you'll find at least the research part if you don't have the experience, that prior help seeking, people who have sought help in the past, it's easily predictable that they will seek help in the future. Most of us know instinctively this is true because you've had a friend or a family member that's a user. They keep asking for more. They keep asking for more. And every time they ask, it seems like it gets easier to ask. So the issue becomes, even if we have good intent, human nature doesn't always align with idealism. Idealism is the problem here. For many people, welfare programs turn into entitlements. And this creates some kind of conundrum. On one hand, we have social safety nets that catch people who are down in their luck. And then on the other hand, we don't have a clean way to keep people from abusing the system. And that leads into a bigger question. Why are there so many people saying the system isn't fair and that we need to redistribute wealth from the top to the bottom? The answer is easy. It's money. And that's why this matters to you. If you're on the path to financial freedom, if you're climbing, if you're playing the game and you're playing to win, if you haven't stepped off the field, the target doesn't land on the people who quit the game. It lands on you. It lands on the people who are producing, saving, investing, climbing, building. All right, quick exercise. Think of a number that represents how much money flows through the U.S. welfare system per year. And we're talking federal plus state plus local. So big number. It's a big number. I'm going to just give you that. So are you ready? 1.5. Now, if I were to quiz you and I said 1.5, I said billion or trillion, you feel like it should be billion, but 1.5 billion is not a lot. So then you'd be like, well, trillion, that doesn't seem right, but it is. It's estimated to be about $1.5 trillion per year flowing through the United States welfare system. Now, keep in mind, the United States government or the United States economy is capitalist, right? It's a capitalist economy. That's not socialism. It's not communism. It's a we have a capitalist society. So our capitalist society generates enough money to go through the welfare system that would rank it somewhere around the 20th largest or in the top 20 largest economies in the world. That's just our welfare system within our regular economy. That's enormous amount of money going through the system. So let it sink in. We have the world's 20th largest economy that is our welfare system. In our capitalist society that everybody's saying is broken and doesn't give enough to the people who don't have. So it's not a small thing. It's not our welfare program is not a small program. It's not an underfunded program. If you think we spend too much on defense, we spend more on welfare. Like, at what point is enough enough? So it's not a small program. There's a ton of money going through it. It's one of the largest systems of money movement that's taking money from one group and giving it to another on the planet Earth. So on the surface, it's all about helping people, right? We're going to help people. You don't make profits helping people. It's not what you do. It's all about helping people. But let's zoom out and consider something. Let's get real about this. What about all the people who work in the businesses and agencies associated with welfare? And there might be people working there for the right reasons. But do you think that unions and employees and contractors and vendors and people who are making a living managing welfare don't see welfare as an industry that needs to be funded more? Now, a quick question for you. How many employees do you think work in the welfare industry? And because our government's so good at keeping numbers, this may or may not be right. They give us a big range, somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5 million jobs directly tied to welfare. If that's even close to true, and that's a big range, 2.5 to 3.5, then you need to understand what that means. It is in the best interest of millions of people, 2.5 to 3.5 million people and their families, not to mention the people receiving the benefits and the politicians giving the benefits out and all their respective staffs and all that kind of stuff, to increase the footprint of welfare, not to shrink it. It is in their best interest to tell you, to make you the villain so that they can take more from you to give it to other people. So a line gets drawn because people have to be categorized. You have to categorize them so you have some kind of identity, the have and the have-nots. Now you can see where we're going with middle class. And it is an industry. It's not a single government program. What makes up the welfare program, we're talking about all these jobs. We're talking about federal agencies, the states plus DC, the county and municipal offices, nonprofit contractors, healthcare providers like Medicaid, housing authorities, IT vendors, eligibility processors, case managers, and the list goes on and on and on. And that means that hundreds of billions of dollars are supporting the jobs and the systems and the organizations, the bureaucracy and the institutions themselves, not just the direct payments to recipients. It seems like if you took $1.5 trillion a year and you split that up between all the poor people, you'd have no poor people after, 1 year. But we never get there. And we're told the problem just keeps getting worse and that people just need more. Now, the problem, I'm not saying the problem is the workers. I don't think the problem is the workers. The deeper issue is the crossroads between power, money, values, and votes. I really think it's a combination of all these things. At the roots, welfare programs are inseparable from politics. You can't separate the two because it comes from politics. That's the way a welfare program is created and funded. So here are the mechanics kind of simplified. First, welfare states are products of political power. They grow in groups of exposed people, have some kind of economic risk that they share, and then they translate that into that insecurity into political influence. So think of the New Deal and stuff like that. In fact, if you look at U.S. welfare expansion, it follows the New Deal in the 1930s. It follows the Great Society of 1960. President Johnson's war on poverty. The creation of major programs like Head Start, SNAP, Medicare, Medicaid, education funding, and HUD, all social welfare programs, all focused on groups of people and helping groups of people. Well, what are groups of people? They're blocks of votes. Once a program exists, too, that policy around that program starts to shape elections. And then elections in return reinforce policy. So it kind of becomes this loop that just keeps feeding itself. And there is research out there that shows that welfare policies are often strategically designed to improve reelection chances. I think that's intuitively, it makes sense to us, even if we don't want to admit it, especially at the state and local level. That's why every single election is about we're trying to save this group or save that group or this marginalized group or that marginalized group. Because if there is none of that, then what are you going to talk about? So we end up with more just political compromise than economic efficiency. Again, go back to I have $1.5 trillion this year to spend to help a bunch of people get out of poverty. Yeah, I can't figure out how to do it because anything that gets into politics is everybody's got to get their cut. So how much of that money actually makes it to them and how much of it is used in a way to incentivize, teach a man to fish. So once a program is established, that creates an administrative institution. It generates beneficiaries. It shapes expectations and government responsibility. And then, of course, you have fraud. And, fraud can be people stealing from the system, and fraud can also be people who otherwise don't need the benefit, but claiming the benefit anyway. So all of it, though, makes the whole system very hard to dismantle. It makes it hard to restrict. It makes it hard to redesign because in order to do so, it's like political suicide. It's just the political cost becomes too enormous for the politicians to bear. They're not going to touch it. So they just kind of keep tinkering around the edges. They never actually fix the program. And here's where the whole conversation starts to really get warped, as if it wasn't warped enough. Ideology determines how welfare is framed. So politics has kind of devolved into this thing where we're just trying to make the other side look bad. And smart politicians understand this. And they understand how to do framing, and they understand how to use words that are hard to argue with. So they can also paint nuance as kind of moral failure. And you see that with the way that they name legislation, like the Inflation Reduction Act that had nothing to do with inflation years ago and stuff like that. But they'll use words like deserving versus undeserving. Well, you can't really argue with that because who's deserving and who's not? Of course, there's people that don't deserve things and there's people who deserve things. Or they'll use things like universal or means tested. I would venture to guess that the average American doesn't have a clue what that means. They'll use things like rights versus charity. It's a right. No, it's charity. Well, you know what? If somebody else is paying for it, it's charity. It's not a right. Market solutions versus state solutions. So the market, capitalism will fix it. State is the government needs to intervene because those dirty capitalists. And that framing battle matters because it determines whether we build a ladder, whether we climb, or whether we build a trap, whether we play not to lose or we quit altogether. So here's the big picture takeaway I want you to have from this. The continual growth of the welfare state becomes the boogeyman. It is the boogeyman. It's not what income class you are. It's not if you're middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class, below lower middle class, the top 1%, the wealthy, whatever category you want to put people in. It's not the income class you're in. It's the welfare state. The welfare cliff is where people get stuck. It's where fear lives. It's where anxiety lives. It's where jealousy lives. It's where helplessness can live. Anybody who's not in welfare in that state looks at it and goes, I don't want to be there. That's for certain. And people who are there in general would like to be in a better state. Whether they are or not, maybe they're comfortable where they're at because it's easier. But there's very few of them that aren't going to look and say, I'd like somebody to give me more. It's where somebody's taking something away from me. That's the welfare states. They're taking it away from me and there's not enough for me to have. I'm going to end up down there without, or I don't have as much. And that's a judgment on me. When welfare becomes the goal, all progress stops. When it becomes the identity, you lose your agency. It's like using crutches when you're not injured. Eventually, you just lose the strength that you had, and now you actually need the crutches. So why does this matter to you in your path to financial freedom? Because the welfare state goes hand in hand with the narrative of the declining middle class. You are doomed. Your children are doomed. And only the government can save you from those nasty rich people. If you accept that worldview, you are not just making a political statement. You are making a personal one. You are saying my outcome is not primarily driven by my choices. And if you genuinely believe that, then your wealth is in trouble, your kids' wealth is in trouble, and your kids' wealth is in trouble because the habits required to build strong finances, to be financially free, don't grow inside the victim narrative. Let me say this maybe another way. Nobody is coming to save you, which also means you are free to save yourself. You've been listening to Ditch the Suits. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to follow on your favorite podcast platform for more insights to help you make better financial decisions and get more out of your money and life.